Get out of your comfort zone. The fear that you're not confronting cannot take your life away. The game of life out there waiting for you to come out and play. I tell you, get out of your comfort zone. I know it takes plenty courage to start all over again, but patience and real perseverance could bring you positive gain. I tell you, get out of your comfort zone. Ay, 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 get out of your comfort zone. I know that you have greatness in you. So, get out of your comfort zone. Ay, 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 get out of your comfort zone.
Yes, get out of your comfort zone. Good afternoon to all our viewers, our listeners, wherever you may be, whether you are in Grenada, in the state of Grenada, which includes Carriacou and Petit Martinique, or whether you are in the wider Caribbean or out there in the diaspora. Good afternoon to you. This is your Comfort Zone program for today, starting quite late again. And, you know, Murphy has been really in our case for the past couple of weeks. I came here and, you know, I had internet connection. I was connected, but there was no service. I had wireless connection, but there was no internet service. You know, and we had that bit of issue. So that held us back quite a bit. And but we are here with you, and we are going to have a program today that should be interesting. Today is Saturday the 24th. This is the 13th edition of the Comfort Zone. It should have been the 14th, but we missed one Saturday. So that's the 13th edition of the Comfort Zone. And the topic for today, and that's why I'd say it should be interesting, is the Grenada Revolution. As we know, tomorrow is the 25th, and it is the day on which we had US forces and Caribbean forces coming into Grenada after the issues which led up to October 19th. And we all know what happened then with the issues on then Fort Rupert, which has now been renamed, has been returned, I should say, to the name that it held before the revolution, Fort George. And that is where we had the execution of the leaders of the revolution and all that went with it. Now, during the course of the week, during that period, and as you find is usually the case every year, the conversation focuses on the conversation relating to the revolution and all that came with it. The focus of it has been and is a historic one that looks at the period starting with Eric Matthew Gary, who then became Sir Eric, his coming back in the early 50s, the strike and what he brought to the people who were working on the plantation, leading up to the revolution and the period of the revolution and so on and so on. You get a historic overview. The focus here today is not a historic perspective per se. The focus here today is the strengths of the revolution. So we're going straight into the fact that there was a revolution. I know that on some programs leading up to today, there has been conversation as to whether it was a revolution or whether it was a coup. These are not the issues that we are going to be focusing on here today. What we'll be focusing on here today is the revolution happened. What were its strengths? What were its weaknesses? What were the opportunities that existed as a consequence of the revolution? What opportunities were embraced? Looking back in hindsight, were there any opportunities that were missed? Were there any threats to the revolution, real or imagined, given the fact that it was a socialist-oriented government, administration, a socialist-oriented initiative? And we know that we were in the dispensation of the Cold War, and the relationship that existed between the two factions, the left and the right at the time. And we in this area in the West, as Morris once said, we in nobody's backyard because we considered to be in the backyard of the United States of America, the king of capitalism. And we saw the threats that existed to similar administrations in the South America and in the Central American region. And given the fact that, in fact, most of, or nearly all, right, about 100%, you might say, of the revolutionary initiatives at the time were driven by socialist thinking, right? And then we had the conflict situation, which put paid to the entire enterprise. Could it have been saved? What could have been done differently to save the process of development that was evident during that period? That is going to be the focus of the conversation here today. And looking back in hindsight now, and seeing that we're looking to build our own development agenda, are there any lessons from that period that can serve in us fashioning an authentic and workable development agenda for the state of Grenada, which includes Carriacou and Petit Martinique? Now, before I really get into my official preamble, because there's a little something that I need to say, I just want to share with you that I am located on Diamond Street in Sunset City, Victoria, St. Mark. Now, in this community, there are some teachers, Mr. Bristol, Cole Bristol, Karen Ellis, Tikima Paul, Forsyth Charles, Shad Noel, and so I am working with these people. I'm helping to coordinate an initiative that they have started. And they have started with an essay competition, which is called the St. Mark COVID-19 essay competition. And it's open to all students in St. Mark, okay? And when I say all students in St. Mark, all students, it doesn't matter what school you go to. So even if you're going to St. Joseph Convent, or you're going to Shepherd's School, or you're going to McDonald College, once you are a student who fit within the age category, you can participate. And the categories are 7 to 9-year-olds. And the 7 to 9-year-olds, they are to write an essay telling everyone what they missed most during the lockdown time. Was it schools? Was it friends? Was it sports, etc.? Whatever it is. And they have to do that within 100 to 150 words. Then we have the 10 to 12 age group, and they have to do an essay within 200 to 250 words. And their topic is, imagine COVID-19 is a person who has taken up residence in your home. Write a letter to him or her, letting him or her know why he or she is not welcome in your home. And they have to do that within 200 to 250 words. And then we have the 13 to 15-year-old. Now they have an option. They can write on the topic that I just mentioned, that the 10 to 12s are to write on, or they have the option of writing on a world after COVID, doing an essay that specifically outlines the differences that they would like to see in a post-COVID world. And that is to be done within 350 to 400 words. Now, the 3 schools within the parish, the one secondary school, St. Mark's Secondary School, the principal is Ms. Digans. They have endorsed that initiative. The Samaritan Presbyterian School, a primary school, and the Bonnet Government School. The principal of St. Samaritan is, his name is not coming to me now, but the principal of the Bonnet School is Mr. Francis. Mr. Kojo is the principal of the Samaritan School. They have endorsed it. And in the 3 schools, in Bonnet Government School, Mr. Cole Bristol, he is going to be the one that is going to be collecting. The deadline for submissions is November the 20th. So Mr. Bristol in Bonnet School, Miss James in Samaritan, and Mr. Richards and Miss Charles in the St. Mark's Secondary Schools. They are the one that will be collecting submissions. We have some independent assessors. And as I said, the deadline is the 20th of November. And the first, second, and third prizes in each categories will be getting a tablet and a small sum of money. And we're asking that all participants do handwritten, because children, we find that students have an issue with handwriting, and so because of all of the technology and so on, we feel that we're losing that skills. So the request is that all submissions come handwritten. So I just wanted to put that plug in here for that initiative. And if you are there, you're from St. Mark or from wherever, and you feel that you can contribute to that initiative, you can get in contact with me. And so on, I put you on to Mr. Cole Bristol, who is the man that's taking care of everything to do with the finances and all that kind of thing. And you'll be hearing more of that initiative going forward, but I just wanted to share that. So before we get to all of our guests here today, I am expecting so far, we only have one of our expected guests. I did send a link to the others. I wouldn't call them out now because they have not indicated anything further, although they had reached out to me to find out what's the state of things. I want to say before we start the official conversation, now, in this week's edition of one of the newspapers, there is an article that tells us that one Ian St. Bernard, who used to be a key member of the revolutionary period, he has put out something in writing. And the article says this, and I'm quoting, "History must explain the truth and nothing but the truth, for it is only the truth that will set us free. I urge all my friends to read a book," so it seemed like he's written a book, "and come to your own to your own conclusions as I have done. As a former member of the Central Committee, I too share responsibility for the disaster. I have paid for my mistakes over the years and continue to do so up to today. I don't want to die perpetuating the lies." And that's back from Ian St. Bernard. Now, as I said, there's been these conversations over the past few days. And for many of those people who were involved in one way or another, and not just the people who were part of the administration, people who would have been impacted on in one way or another, it is a challenging time, okay, for them. And so you find, as I said, this historical treatise, as I call them, taking place during that period. Uh, One of the things that is very noticeable is that even among the revolutionary fraternity, that is, the people who were, you know, involved in a serious way in the revolution, there is a split between them in those who support Maurice Bishop and those who feel that there's the others who supported Bernard Cord. And there is that philosophical thing that is happening. In fact, one person who is a lover of Maurice Bishop said to me that, you know, in reference to one of the guests that I've invited to be here, oh, they didn't like Maurice, so they were anti-revolution. And so I had to tell the person, well, you know, even if the person, whatever the issues are with Maurice, that doesn't equate to being anti-revolution, because for me, and it is said that you cannot see the picture when you are in the frame. Now, incidentally, I haven't been in the frame. I was not in the frame. I was not involved in the revolution. Unfortunately, I was never arrested or detained or anything. So I have the you know, the option of being able to take a more critical and pragmatic look at things than others may be able to do, because I was not impacted in that way. I have my own opinions about certain things that went down, but I was not impacted in that way. So I do not necessarily have a side. I'm in the middle of the road. I could get knocked down anytime, you know? So I could take a different kind of look than others may, you know. So I am not in the blame game thing as others are likely to be. And as I have seen taking place on some of the programs in recent times. Okay, one of the things I believe is that 37 years afterwards, just repeating those historic overviews and treatises and not going to provide an unadulterated narrative, which is what some people seem to be looking for. It's like people are looking for a story, a narrative that is unadulterated, that tells you in no uncertain terms exactly everything that happened as it happened. And I don't feel that that is ever going to happen. And people are looking for closure, and they seem to be expecting that. In my books, Humpty Dumpty fell, and he shattered into pieces. And there is no way that you can put Humpty Dumpty back together authentically so that you will have the original Humpty Dumpty. That is not going to happen. So I believe that people need to begin saying the prayer of serenity. Lord, grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, and the courage to be able to change what I can going forward. Yes, I think that is the stage where we are at, and let's see what we can change. And that's why my focus is on that. Okay, because everyone, throughout each of the periods, there is that comparison again between the Gary period and the revolutionary period, who did more atrocities and so on and so forth. Every period brought with it its own challenges. Every period did certain things that were good and did certain things that were unfavorable, that resulted in its demise. I mean, look at it. Gary was GULP. Where is GULP today? GLP tried after Gary to continue, but it was unable to, because GLP was about Eric Matthew Gary. What did the party song say? We will never let our leader fall because we love him the best of all. The party song was not about the people and their struggles. It was about the leader. So we can spend time speaking about who committed more atrocities, whether it was the Mongoose Gang or the revolution and so on. We can talk about these things. But the question is, how does that help with us implementing a development agenda for the country going forward? Does it help in any significant way? That's a question that we want to ask ourselves. And the other thing before I close, I want to say that we are presently functioning, and prior to the revolution, outside of the revolution, this is where we've been functioning, in a parliamentary democratic system that we inherited from England. And I wonder how many of us really consider the fact that that system allows our leaders, it enables our leaders to go into parliament and to be able to say untruths and not be held accountable for it. Because things that you can say in parliament, you cannot be charged for it. The things that you can say outside in the public domain and get sued for, you can say it in parliament and have no accountability to give. Have you ever thought about that? Seeing that we have a system that allows or enables our politicians, our parliamentarians, the people who run our government, to be able to lie with impunity, what does that say about the possibilities for the relationship, the way that they would relate to us? I know that many a time you hear people speak about the need to break the colonial chains and the whole issue of mental slavery. But at the same time, these people do not want to separate themselves from the colonial accolades of the sirs and the whatever else. Yeah? We don't want to. And that is the reason why this whole issue of white supremacy is perpetuated, because people do not want to let go of the skirt tails of the queen. And so much so, while in the 70s, we had the Black Power era and so on, and people were beginning to be very nationalistic in their thinking, and people were beginning to look at themselves, look at the ethnicity and respect it and appreciate it. And we were saying black is beautiful. Now we are back to where you too black is a derogatory statement that you hear coming from people to others. How far have we come? And at this point in time, we are in a state where we have become very superficial, and we settle for instant gratification, and we do not want to bother ourselves with the hardcore issues, and so our politicians get a pass. This is where we are at as we struggle to build, and to have a development agenda for our country. So we are going to be looking at what were the strengths, what were the weaknesses, what were the threats, what were the opportunities, how do we treat with conflicts and so going forward? What kind of impact does it have on us as a people, as individuals, in our families and so? Because we saw just recently 2 brothers seem to have had a conflict and one killed the other. How do we treat with conflicts? We see in the midst of all of these challenges, suicides. The rate of suicides are increasing. I mean, when I was a boy, I don't know people taking their life. Now we hear a 70-year-old lady has taken her life. So we see young people, teenagers are taking their lives out here. So let's have a conversation today about these things. And let's look at what is the role that the diaspora, because many of my guests today are people who live in the diaspora. What's the real role? Are they only to be limited to providing remittances? because remittances, admittedly, is a major component of our economy, has been for many years now. Is that all that our diaspora can do in terms of the building of our development agenda? And so I really want to say thank you to John Calise for providing me with the platform to be able to speak to these issues, because I mean, you know, some of these things I've had in my head for a while now. I've never had such a platform to be able to say these things. You know, I want to say thank you to Coach Naka Joseph, who has helped me to zero in on some of those issues that I'm sharing here today. To Ms. Judy Williams for providing the opportunity to work within the civil society organization and development agency, and so that helped to fashion and to shape me. You know, and my first stint doing a program like this came as a result of Nazim Buck pointing me out and say, we need you to do the NDC Heartbeat program. So all of these people have made it possible for me to be here today. I couldn't have come in contact with John Calise without Shane Ross. So Shane Ross, thank you for linking me to John Calise, who eventually offered me. And I want to emphasize that I was offered the chance to be here. I didn't ask for it.
True.
I didn't ask for it. I was offered the chance to be here to be doing that program.
That's a great message.
So let's get into a conversation. I know we started late and I take a lot of time talking, but you know, that's me. As one colleague of mine say, boy, Pablo is a man, he don't talk too much, you know. But put a mic in front of him and he wouldn't want to stop talking. That's how I get sometimes. So my apologies, but I feel I needed to say, to lay down, you know, the rules of engagement for today. That is our focus today, not a blame game. So at this point in time, I take a short break as I ask my technical operator. He is also a guest on the program today, Mr. John Calise. He is also a guest. He is going to be participating actively in the conversation, but he's the technical operator. He can't get away from that. So we're going to take a break as we play the anthem from the revolutionary period, Forward March. Brother John, have you have it lined up? Let's get Forward March from the revolutionary period. I know many of you would not have heard this thing for a long, long time, and you haven't heard that song. So let's play Forward March.
Rupert march to un forward march. That's the march against oppression, forward march. Now Grenadians of cultivation, end of misery and oppression. So we fill Grenada full with our song. Forward march, forward march. Forward march against imperialism. Forward march, forward march. Forward march against imperialism. March to call for federation, forward march. We all fight for liberation, forward march. Now Grenadians of cultivation, end of misery.
While my technical operator gets Forward March, who really see a couple of my expected guests. We had reached out to the program, and I was having trouble with my internet connection, and I am hoping that you are going to be joining us shortly. I haven't seen them as yet. I don't know if they're waiting until we get into the meat of the conversation. I'm expecting a few of them, and some who were actively involved in the revolution at one level or another. One person who was at Tilly. So I'm hoping that we can have a good conversation this afternoon as we look at what were the strengths, what were the weaknesses, What were the opportunities? What were the threats? Could the conflict have been resolved and the development process continue? So, forward march. Yes, that was the revolutionary anthem. And it was something that you would have heard those who lived through that period could identify with and would be aware of, and was always played when you had, major events, major activity. It was part and parcel of when you had those, whether there was going to be a speech by the Prime Minister and stuff like that. So as I said, I'm expecting a couple of people to join me, but I have with me presently, John Callis is a guest, although he's the technical operator. I have Mr. Hudson George, the man who has the photographic memory, and he remembers everything. They say he's like an elephant. He doesn't forget anything. And I have Miss Cassandra Mitchell. She has joined us. Now, she didn't live through the revolutionary period, but being a youth leader in this time and someone who is a very studious person, it is understandable that she would have a perspective on the revolution, having an appreciation of the development process that transpired during that time. And she would be able to share from a youth perspective, from a youth standpoint, some of the perspectives that she as a young person and maybe other young people would have on the revolution, what it brought, and what that experience, the lessons that can come from such an experience in terms of creating a development agenda for our country. So these are the three people that are with me. As I said, I'm expecting some others to join me. And at this point in time, I'll allow, starting with the lady, I'll allow Miss Cassandra Mitchell to share with us, to say, well, Miss Cassandra Mitchell, I know she's been here quite a few times, so that part shouldn't take very long. But in just a few words to say, what, from her vantage point, does she see to have been some of the strengths of the revolution? Ms. Mitchell.
Hi, good afternoon to the rest of the panel. Good afternoon to your viewers and your listeners.
Good afternoon, good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Hi, Elson.
Yes,
Hi,
yes, good afternoon.
Yeah, I was more here like just to listen to you guys and hear your individual experiences that you had during the revolution, and then I would have been able to kind of garner and maybe share some perspectives that I would have had, because just coming into the program, I think one of the biggest challenges, and over the last few days when many platforms have been recognizing October 19th and other days, and discussion started, especially among young people, about how much we do not know about the revolution and how that aspect of our history seems so confusing. Even looking at the educational curriculum, as someone who was coming out of high school, what I would openly give public commendation to my history teacher, Miss Chase, because the curriculum in of itself does not address local history. But what our history teacher did was we took Saturdays off, specifically to focus on the Grenadian history, so the revolution and other aspects of the Grenada history. She took Saturdays off to teach us what she knew, and we at that time the public library was open, so I had the opportunity to go in there and pull from the archives, old newspapers, clippings, from plantation owners. So I was able to kind of grasp a bit of our history. But generally, our history in Grenada is not recorded very much, and it's not taught in schools. And I've been listening to different platforms where young people have been talking about it. And there's a lot of confusing information as to what transpired during that era in Grenada. So yes, it will be just opinions that I would have and that young people would have based on what we would have gathered from different individuals and different platforms, that were able to share different snippets of the Grenadian history, not just the revolution. Our history seems to be so confuffled that we don't seem to have facts. And that's why I know for me, I continue to encourage those I know who have lived through that era to record it, even if it, of course, it would be your opinion and your own individual experience, but it will be recorded so that when you leave this mortal life, at least we and our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren will have some sort of records that we can go back to, even if it's from Hudson or if it's from Sheriff or Delbert or other people, Bernard, who lived through the revolution. We would love to have it. Yes, so we do have some sort of opinions as to what the revolution did for us, both the good and the bad. But the general perspective is we need to know more.
Yes,
we need
so
to have
from
that
what,
record.
if I may come in here, from all that you've listened to, from all that you said that you've been exposed to it since you were at school and so, what do you see to have been the strengths of the revolution?
Well, this is debatable, but one of the things that I experienced that I love about the revolution.
Everything is debatable. Everything is debatable.
Yeah, because I know what I'm going to say. I've heard people debate
it. Miss Mitchell, we are asking your opinion. Everything is debatable.
I think youthfulness is something that I appreciate from the revolution.
Okay?
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
Youthfulness is something that
That being said, everything is debatable. That being said, what do you see to have been, because you cannot give someone else's opinion. We are asking your opinion.
Yes.
Right. And you don't have to make excuses for your opinion, I find people behave as if they have to give an excuse as to why they have an opinion about something. You have an opinion and that's it. That is your opinion. You're entitled to it. Okay? So,
it's interesting,
what is your
that you would say
opinion?
that.
Yes, what is your opinion as to what were the strengths of the revolution?
Looking back on what I had, the information I have gathered, and yes, you're right, it's my opinion.
Right.
Is that when you look at the the agriculture sector, for instance, there was so much that was happening back during that era that is practically non-existent now, that we could learn from the revolution. You look at some of the initial objectives of that era. I think it was I think the intentions were well. The people who were talking about or agro processing. If you look at the airport, I want to say something, but it's okay. But if you look at the airport, if you look at a lot of the developments that came out from that era, I think that Grenada was in a better place then than we are now. Because a lot of these things, if they were kept, I heard about the concrete plants and some of these centers where young people would have gone through to learn, the emphasis on adult learning and all of those things during that era. If we had kept them, focused on them, build on them, I do believe that Grenada would have been in a much better place. I'm looking at it then and looking at it now. I think we are moving. There's a slogan. Forward ever, backward never. But I think what is happening now is that we are going backward ever and forward never. With all due respect, all of the big infrastructural projects that you're seeing, if you look at the development of our biggest resources, or human resources, I don't see much development. And I would have liked to see a lot of the individuals who would have gained educational opportunities in that era come back and develop Grenada. So yes, I think the revolution had a lot of strengths in terms of some of the areas that it focused on. I think we have lost that. So I appreciate that. I know we're not going to talk about the weaknesses because you did ask me to speak.
We are going to get to the weaknesses shortly.
Yes. Okay. But that is something I appreciate from that era. Okay. So many things I think we have lost it now.
Okay. All right. Mr. Hudson George, you were a soldier during that period, which means for you to have gotten involved at that level, you saw something constructive and something meaningful for you to have gotten involved. What, from your vantage point, was some of the strengths of that period?
Well, first of all, I will say that the Grenada Revolution, as you said, you were not involved. Cassandra said she was not involved, and maybe she wasn't born yet. I don't know her age. John Kelly was involved. But we got to look at, we cannot just jump into the Grenada Revolution as per se the strength and weakness of the revolution. I left school in 1974.
Hudson George, just a minute.
No, I'm going to give you.
Hudson George, just a minute. Hudson George, just a minute.
Yeah.
Just a minute.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I'm hosting this thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. I said the parameters here.
Yes.
I say we are discussing. Now, the revolution is a point of fact that happened. It is a historical fact that happened.
Yes.
Now, over the past few weeks, there's been conversation. The historical component of it has been discussed to no end. Hold on, just a minute.
Yeah.
Just a minute. And we get, that is where we have been. That's all we have done for the past 37 years. Today, we are looking at the revolution. You say that we cannot jump into the revolution. We have jumped into that period. That is where we are. We are in that period, and we are analyzing that period to say what were the strengths of it, what were its weaknesses, what were the threats, and what were the opportunities. I am asking you, what, as someone who was a soldier then, and someone in hindsight, someone who is a student of history and all of that, not your historical perspective, but the fact that the revolution happened, what do you see to have been the strengths of that initiative?
The strength of the revolution. For me to give you that history,
I'm not asking for a historical.
No, I'm not giving you.
Overview.
The strength is the history. So I'm giving you. Don't cut me off.
Go ahead.
I'm not going into the same programs the guys had before. I told you that earlier. What I'm trying to tell you, Cassandra is younger than us and she's willing to listen, she said. John is from a period that I was not from. So I was giving you the strength from that period where I'm come from, right? The strength of the revolution for me is that the revolution had created some avenues where they send people and study. That's one of the strengths of the revolution. But I'm telling you that the revolution has gone through stages that the stages of mid-1980 to 1983, I don't know nothing about it. So I'm dealing with, you told me I was a soldier, I'm dealing with the time I was a soldier. I was a soldier in the revolution when the revolution was the NJM. So the strength of the revolution is, I'll say, education. As for things like development, we mentioned, we talk about agro industry, yes. Agro industry was a factor, but we have to remember again, we had agro industry before. We had things like we used to make soap in Grenada before the revolution. We used to make ice before the revolution, and we used to make salt. So agro industry was not new, was not a new industry brought in by the revolution. We used to dry fish in the revolution, and the revolution continued drying fish. So I'm not here to make excuses. The weakness of the revolution is...
We ain't getting to weaknesses yet.
The strength of the revolution...
Strengths is what we're dealing with right now. We'll get
I think the strength is overrated. The only strength of the revolution I could really mention is more people went and studied. And Gary had built lots of junior secondary schools. And the revolution turned it into full-fledged secondary school. And perhaps the revolution was wrong to turn all these schools into academic schools, because if you look at the trend of the world today...
Okay, Hudson. So you've spoken, you've given your opinion as to what you see as the strengths of the revolution. And
yes.
You don't seem to have anything.
What is that a strength? I'm just telling you the transformation.
You don't seem to have anything else to add to the issue of the strengths of the revolution.
What is that?
Let's move on and have someone else give their perspective of what they see to have been the strength of the revolution. And we see that two more persons have joined us. We see that Martin Ken Lewis has joined us, and we see that Delbert Baptiste has also joined us. And I am going to go to my technical operator because he's been here all along, and he is also a guest, as I said. He was very much integrally involved with the revolution. What do you see, Mr. John Caliste? Could you unmute your mic, please, to have been the strengths? What do you consider to have been the strength of that period? And when I speak about the revolution, because it's not when I speak. When people speak about the revolution, They are speaking about the period March 13th, 1979 to October the 25th, 1983. That's the period of the revolution. Now, if you're doing a historical perspective, you're doing a historical treatise of it, you always have to go back to Gary and all that went with it and so on, if you're doing a historical treatise. This is not what we are doing here today. The other programs have been doing historic treatises, okay? The other programs have been doing historic assessments. This is not the focus of this program here today. The focus of this program is there was a period from 1979, because before 1979, there wasn't anything called the Grenada Revolution per se, okay? You had anti-Gary protests and other activities that took place during this period in the run-up to the March 13, 1979. Talk of a Grenada Revolution came into being after March 13, 1979. So that is the period under review here. And that is the period that we are looking at. What were the strengths of that period? What were the weaknesses of that period? What were the opportunities from that period? And what were the threats from that period? Okay? It is that period that we are doing a review of. And we are going to try to deduce from that, are there any lessons that we can learn from that can serve in the development, in putting together a development agenda for the country? Okay, I spelled it out to all the participants that this is what this program was going to be, and this program is not going to degenerate into another historic treatise of that era. Okay. It is 1979 to 1983. What happened? How does that period? What were the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats during that period, and how does that serve for a development agenda going forward? That for me is the Grenada Revolution. Okay, Mr. Kelly.
All right, again, Pablo, thank you very much again for the opportunity to be a guest on your show today. I really appreciate that. For me, the strength of the revolution, one, I see education was key. I was a teacher, a CPE teacher at age 12, going and teach. And that to me was a big thing. The youth development, the youth movement to me was a big positive for me. People, the political awareness, consciousness of the masses, and we could see that today, the level of thinking of young people and those who catapult out of that era. So for me, education was the key thing. The youth movement, the women's movement, the student movement, of which I was part of again with Delbert and Ken. So for me, that four pillars right there, and the agro-industry program that they had, to me that five was the key pillars of the revolution. But for me, that is strength I saw that came out of that era. And just to say this, because the strength, when talking about the strength of the revolution, those four elements have created the substance from which people was drawn into the process. So for me, that five thing was the strength of the revolution, from where I'm standing from.
Okay, and now I've deliberately fashioned these things to discuss the different elements separately, because I don't want us to be all over the place. So we're looking at strengths here and we're looking at strengths. We'll get to weaknesses thereafter. Yeah. Mr. Brother Baptiste, I'm happy to see that you chose to join me. I was very uncertain as to whether you were going to join me today, but I'm happy to see that you are here. So Brother Baptiste, well, tell me, you were part of the revolutionary process. I mean, there's no doubt. I mean, you've made your feelings known that it's a period that you emulate and so on, that you hold in high esteem. What do you see, would you say, were the strengths of the revolution?
So I didn't commit to joining the show earlier on because I had a doctor's appointment. Okay. But great, thankfully I got through my appointment, so I was able to join in. So for me, there were many strengths, right? And I want to agree with you that we focus focus exactly on the way that you have structured this thing today. So I look at the advancements made in education, the advancement made in agriculture, the sort of systematic management of the Grenadian economy, the putting together of plans that gave people a sort of ownership in what was happening in the country. Cassandra spoke earlier on about the advancement made in agriculture and areas like that. How infrastructure projects was laid out. It was no longer helter-skelter. Things were planned, the benefits were looked at. There was a systematic way into determining which projects get done first, which projects was bringing the most tangible benefits to people, and how can we get it done given the limited financial resources and also the limited, sometimes technical and human resources that we had. So these things were sort of, for the first time, certainly in my lifetime, and I'd been not necessarily been involved in government, but I'd been involved in public policy prior to the revolution. But I want to mention one more thing, and it's not my idea, and I was forced to rethink it this week. It comes from a friend of mine, Jerry Grant, who I think most folks know. And he had a post on Facebook this week where he talked about what he thought was the major, the number one benefit of the revolution. And in his post, he suggested, and I totally concur with him, that the lingering and major benefit of the revolution was that because of the investment that were made in education, it resulted in the creation of what is today the Grenada middle class. And I had to take a look at it because actually I had never thought of it that way. And when you look at it and you look at how that middle class in Grenada has emerged, I have to give the brother full credit for the idea. And I think that in retrospect is going to turn out to be the single most important thing that the revolution did. Because the revolution was always about expanding economic benefits for people. And the best way to broaden and to enlarge the economic pie is to expand and build and create or to develop and expand in middle class. And the fact that people are looking, that he and I suspect other economists are going to have to take a look at that. I would like Ken to speak on it. I think those for me were really important. One of the other things I want to mention, as somebody who traveled fairly frequently for the government representing Grenada, the revolution gave people like me a sort of can-do attitude and a sort of confidence that when we traveled, there was something about being Grenadian that made you feel that you could accomplish anything. It gave us confidence, okay? And that's something that money can't buy. So that's the way I feel about it. And like I said, we'll get into the negative side, but you know, I still largely remain unapologetic.
Yeah. Now, I want to remind people that people don't, as I said to Sister Cassandra early on, you know, your opinion is your opinion. And people don't have to make any apologies for their opinion. Your opinion is something that you're entitled to and you have a right to. And I think that you have an opinion, you give a perspective, you give a rationale for it, right? And then you don't have to necessarily justify it to anybody. Okay, as I said before, this is not about doing a comparative analysis between the revolutionary period and the Gary period or what came after. No, This is not about a comparative analysis. This is about looking at that period, what were its strengths, what were its weaknesses, and so on. So, Brother Ken, unmute your mic and tell us about not what role you played and so on and so forth. Tell us, what do you see to have been the strengths of the revolution during that time?
Okay, well, good night to your panelists. Good night to your guests. Good afternoon to everyone listening. I think I don't want to go over a lot because I think education, hands down, as Hudson, as Delbert, as John has said, I think that's the main one. I want to point out to another though that I think is really important. I think Delbert hinted at it, which is the standing of your country. They did an analysis to find out how countries really progress. Not just economics in terms of money and so on, but what really make people want to invest in a country. And they found that in a lot of ways, as we go through globalization and so on, it's really important the way the international community see your country. And I think that is a real benefit in terms of internal and looking at your strengths in terms of what was really helpful. I think that is one of the major strengths of the revolution that actually misses sometimes, that sometimes we miss. Just the international standing, the fact that people were involved, the fact that the revolution was people-centered, the fact that it was geared towards education. I think all of those are important. But I think Grenada stood a real chance of development because of the heightened international standing, despite the attempts from the US in particular to malign and to eventually evade and so on. Leaving all of that out, I think the real international standing of Grenada was a real benefit from the revolution. Thank you.
So, I think I've covered everyone in terms of looking at what were the strengths of the revolution. And before we get into what were the weaknesses of the revolution, I want to take a short break. I know we time, and I would like our guests to try and compress the responses as much as possible going forward. We take a short break right now, Mr. Technical Operator, with a song that was very popular during that period, and I being one of them, you know what I mean? Although I wasn't in the revolution. Natty Dread in a PRA.
Fighting over foreign philosophy.
We are here over radio station that dread over Chobal Jam by revolution. It's true I am dreadlocks are not your can come and say long live Grenada revolution. Praises unto the Most High.
Yes, we are not. Hello.
Mistrust.
Yes, Brother John. Brother John. Yes, let's cut today. I know it would have been nice to take in the whole song, but I mean, let's cut today. No, we know that during that period, you know, there was lots of dreadlock men, Rastaman. Some came down from the hills and joined, you know, because Rasta had been significantly challenged and under threat by the Gary regime. But as it turns out, they did face some significant ones from the revolution eventually. So let's look at what were some of the weaknesses of the revolution. Okay? What were some of the weaknesses? Everything has strengths. They do have weaknesses. And to start this one off, Hudson, if you would unmute your mic, I'd give you the first go at this one. Hudson George, what, if you unmute your mic is muted. Yeah, what from your vantage point were the weaknesses of the revolution in as short a period as possible?
The weakness of the revolution, it wasn't cultural. It was not a cultural revolution. And conflict over foreign ideology. Both Marxism and Rastafarianism is foreign to our Grenadian culture, which is very focused on a lot of the topics before. Rastafarianism is not part of Grenadian culture more than Marxist-Leninism. So they were both foreign to our culture, and lack of consultation. If those people with Marxist ideology and those with Rastafarian ideology, both of them was foreign to our culture, if they had sit down and listen to each other instead of having that first conflict in 1980, as a PRA myself, you could ask PRA at Paul's Army Barracks, one major come to the army and say, let us raid marijuana. I don't smoke marijuana. You could ask any PRA. And I was the only PRA who would stand up and say, no, I'm not raiding marijuana. I say, if I raid marijuana, if we raid the marijuana, the revolution is going to fall. You could ask any PRA. If me, Melon, never tell them that. And I don't smoke marijuana. PRA call me Melon. And the major was angry with me. And I become a madman.
The weaknesses of the revolution, please.
This is one weakness. Two, foreign ideology. I touched that already. Artificial tribalism. Artificial tribalism in sense of mistrust. When you create an intellectual soccer and you alienate grassroots people, you won't be able to continue a revolutionary process. For example, look at what happened in Bolivia. Evo Morales was kicked out by the CIA, but the grassroots support in Bolivia was able to elect his party back to power. The NJM transfer from NJM to PRG. They get rid of the grassroots NJM. Whether they were Rastafari, whether they were middle class planters, peasants, you create an intellectual soccer. You destroy that part of the revolution. Mistrust is another one. Key, I will say, lack of consultation. October 19, he showed up. People, lack of consultation. People didn't understand we have a central committee. Also, propaganda haunts the PRG. The regime portray one man to the people. And it's part of black people culture, following a leader. So they never know if Grenada was run by a central committee. They were following a leader. That was the witness of the revolution.
Okay. I want to say Hudson mentioned about the Rastafari being something alien to Grenadian culture. In the context of the revolution, Rasta was here before the revolution happened. So I don't necessarily think that one had any bearing on the other. The other thing too is, for a fact, being people who were transported from Africa, being descendants, African descendants basically, and we, throughout the region, whatever culture that were developed, if we notice, what is called Grenada culture is a mixing of African cultures and other European cultures and so on to develop what has emerged as a Grenadian culture, you know. And so I do not think really that the coming of Rasta into Grenada from Jamaica, right, has anything to do, you know, in any critical sense, can be considered in a real sense as being something that was alien to Grenada culture. You know, that is something for another discussion and for another debate. We move on to Brother Delbert Baptiste. What do you see to have been some of the weaknesses? Brother Delbert, unmute your mic if you don't mind. What do you see to have been some of the weaknesses of that period?
I think there were many weaknesses, but in the end, what I think it is that youthfulness, our inability to resolve conflict or disagreements through conversation, and that need to understand where the other person is coming from. Also, as good as the revolution was at identifying talents, it was also had a downside to that, in that we sort of kind of expected everybody to be everything, and we were not very good at identifying sometimes what somebody might be very, very good at and allow them to focus on that area of work. But because you were dealing with so much limited human resources, they expected everybody to do everything. Our experience today has taught us that's very different. The other thing is that the revolution sort of became, after, because of the fear of always being attacked by the U.S. We sort of lived sometimes with real fear and sometimes imagined fear, and that developed a sort of very insular nature of the party. And so we got to a point where you didn't trust your shadows. Okay, Hudson kind of briefly touched on it, but I also think that the fact that, you know, generally when systems or companies or countries succeed, you sort of have a cadre of elder statesmen who, when there's a crisis, you can turn to help, you know, sort of iron out the differences. We had gotten rid of all the so-called elder statesmen, and we did not trust them because most of them had come out of the Gary GNP era. So when we needed that most seasoned elder counseling, it was not there. And because we were so always exuberant, you know, in the degree in which we thought everything we were doing was correct 100% of the time, we just drove ourselves to a point where we weren't listening to anyone, and in most cases, sometimes ourselves. So in the end, those are things that on the surface looked like they were strong individual qualities for respect for different people, turned out to be our Achilles heel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Batiste. If we might move on now to Brother Lewis. Mr. Lewis, if
Yes,
you want
sir.
to, yes, sir. And tell us what do you see to have been those weaknesses of the revolution?
Okay, I agree with Delbert almost totally. I think there is one, I just want to refer to one thing which was listed as a weakness, and is that it's a foreign ideology. Look, economics is a universal is a universal thing. Everybody use money, everybody sell goods. So there are some theories that will be applied worldwide. So I don't think that a foreign ideology or an ideology being used somewhere is necessarily a weakness. I think its application probably was. And if that's Hudson is referring to, I really think that that was a weakness, probably the way it was applied, not the very theory itself. But I want to point out one other weaknesses that is related, and that is the lack of systems thinking. And I think that is one of the things I've seen after working in the US and working within large company here. I've seen that is radically different to us in Grenada during the revolution and still now. We don't think in terms of systems, systematically. And I want to give an example. I went home once when the millibug was raging. And I remember at a major conference, one of the people saying, look, let's just buy some product that could kill it. And let's just spray down the place. And basically, a lot of people in that conference were basically agreeing with the brother saying that. No, of course, systems thinking would have taken into account what people did them before, how you address some of these things, what the impacts are, what's the impacts on the rest of the environment. And I think a lot of times in Grenada and during the revolution, even if we talked about planning and started planning, there was still not systematic thinking. So the demise of the revolution, in fact, the final episode of the revolution, when those two sides met and it was going to be killed or be killed, regardless of who won, is a simple case of us totally ignoring systems thinking. In people trained to think systematically, they would have said, let's sit, let's see what compromise we can come to. And that is still a problem I see in Grenada, even within political parties, even within businesses. We have to be more systematic in our thinking.
You know, it's interesting that you raised that last point, because I think that component is going to fit well when we look at the conflict and what could have been done differently that could have saved that development process and that development agenda that had been established, right? Let's bear in mind that we are doing an assessment of that period, that revolutionary period, its strengths, its weaknesses, its opportunities, its strengths. Brother Kellis.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes,
what do you see to have been those weaknesses of the revolution?
Opinion matters here, right? And I just wanted to support what Ken and Delbert said. But one of the things I come to realize that youthfulness without experience of running government was a big problem, big weakness. The inability to sit down and talk, and as Ken said in the end, if there was a sense of talking out to the end and not resorting to violence, I think that would have been, that is one of the weakness. However, another weakness I saw is the structure of some of the system again, how it operated, right? In fact, we had a Ministry of Planning, you still had that problem of systematic thinking, you know, to like I can say I'm out here now, I'm seeing stuff that if it was now, I would have been able to say, look, this is what we should do. You know, I think we out here we get some more experience and we could look back in retrospect and say, that was a problem right there. Systematic thinking, you know, critical thinking skills wasn't really, I think that was a big weakness, you know, the critical thinking skills. There was people who was thinking critical, but there was those who was not, you know, so I think the whole process of putting a system in place was a weakness, you know. Somebody said, not hearing me? Let me say.
No, I'm here.
Yeah, we're hearing you. We're hearing you.
We are hearing you. I don't know.
All right. Yeah, so systematically thinking things through, how to put structures and systems in place. That was, to me, was a kind of a weakness in one sense. Another thing, youth inexperience in leadership. There was leaders, yes, and there was those who was emerging leaders who didn't really calculate risk. You know, there was no risk management in certain cases in terms of independent thinking. So that was a big problem to me. Another thing I saw as a problem was the question of dealing with people who was opposed to the revolution, how that was handled. It was handled in a way that people was thinking, you know, we in charge. I'm in charge of this thing now, and if you don't do it, it's like Moise Maker mentioned one time, one in spirit. If they don't do what I say, it's up the hill for them, you know. So that was the kind of mentality. The other thing was I call it a weakness, but I think it's something that would have happened eventually. The failing to have, like many people say, election, but at the same time, you're trying to consolidate something, you're trying to build a process and put structures in place, and 5 years is not enough time. So to have an election would be a premature sort of ejaculation in a sense, for a better word, that you push out something there that does not really get to the grassroots enough. You didn't really have the elements to prove that you have done something. You know, you overthrow a government and then remove one system in place, put another one in, and you're going to have an election prematurely, you will lose. Because if you open up the floor, say, look, 5 years, what have they done? You know, and so you have to give yourself time to breathe. And so I think the election process was something that had to be speed up, and the economic development was on its way. But I think one of the things that I look at is the systematic way of thinking, and that's to me one of the biggest weakness.
Pablo,
Hello.
I want to just make one comment.
Yeah, please. Yeah, go ahead.
I want to just make one comment.
Yeah,
Something
sure.
I forgot, which by the way, I expected Hudson to raise, but he didn't. Is this, Hudson? The revolution was too St. George's centered still. I think despite John's point of us trying to reach to other parts of people involvement and everything else, but I still think it was too St. George's centered. And in a lot of ways, we have someone, okay. And in a lot of ways, I think that we were too easy to dismiss people who started to come from outside of that tight center. So I think that's another real problem that we saw in the revolution.
Well, Ken, I did raise it when I talk about artificial tribalism. I didn't want to go deep as you. Because when the major enter Paul's army barrack and he tell us go and raid the weed, I said, no, I'm not going. You're going to break up the revolution. But he doesn't understand because he's coming from a urban center. He don't know rural life. I said, if you interfere with the ganja too quick, you go destroy the revolution. And he get angry. But I always outspoken. And I say, I'm not going. Okay. But if you ask anybody who goes to me, smoke a spliff, tell them they lie. I don't smoke weed. But I'm very outspoken.
All right. So let's move on. Sister Cassandra, if you would unmute your mic and just share with us, see, you were not there during that period, but from what you have been exposed to, you did share with us what you see to have been the strength of the revolution. What do you see to, to have been some of the weaknesses of that period?
Well, Davos and Sheriff actually said some of the things that I observed based on my reading and what I've gathered from those who have been there. That while youthfulness may have been a strength of the revolution, I think there was unbridled exuberance, which led to the downfall of the revolution and some of the objectives. One of the things I also noticed was the clash of different ideologies. And you guys explained it best. You had different sides who, I guess, had different ideologies. And when you tie youthfulness into that, and unbridled youthfulness, if I may, then there was that gap, and there was lack of communication and coming together and sitting and trying to push Grenada forward, when I guess both sides came to a point when they had different perspectives and they were not agreeing on certain things. And if you look at the leaders that existed then, if you look at Bernard, if you look at what's his name, Bishop, what I see is two figures who are, especially Bishop, who are charismatic, but he was still authoritarian to some level. And having these two strong personalities is also one of the things I think led to the downfall of the revolution. There is also the perception, whether rumored true or false, about the interference of outside interference, political interference, because there are allegations that leaders were playing geopolitical games, which was not ideal for what was happening within the context of Grenada at the time. And again, you tie that into their ideologies and what they thought was best for the country. Something else that Sheriff mentioned too is the trampling of civil liberties. I've been doing a lot of research on the Constitution, and one of the things interestingly that was brought up was that during the time of Bishop, there was no Constitution; it was suspended. And then you see a lot of people who have lived through the revolution talking about some of the things that were done to them. Some of the fundamental rights and freedom, civil liberties were trampled upon during that era. Once you start doing that, then you start eroding the whole process and the whole concept of democracy. So that is something that we have observed, as some of us young people have been paying attention to our history, in particular that era would have led to the downfall of the revolution and what we believe were good intentions at first.
Okay. In the interest of time, I'm not going to take the break that I had scheduled to take at this point in time. I'm just going to go into what were some of the opportunities that were that came to fore as a result of the revolution, right? What did we embrace? Or yes?
I want to address one thing. I don't know if Ken picked up on it, but Castor said something. I don't think the problem was ideological difference. I think the ideology was the same. I think that the post-economic development was the same. One of the things I said is inability to negotiate properly. To sit down and talk, to constructively respect each other's view. I think that was a problem. So that wasn't like the ideology was different in terms of where Grenada was going. The constitution was suspended, but they was in the process of developing their own constitution for Grenada. As a matter of fact, the Constitution Commission was set up, and the person, I think Alan Alexander, was in Grenada to foster that. So there wasn't like the revolution had laws. In the suspension of the constitution, there was laws that govern the country still, right? And there were some things that was put in place just to make sure and to ensure that it wasn't trampled on, right? So that was one. I want to correct that. Thank you.
And the laws that existed would have been the Emergency Powers Act, right?
Yes, to a certain extent, yes. All right.
But one of the questions let me ask, if there was discussions to have a, I guess, constitutional reform, why suspend the constitution that exists? Because you can have constitutional reform and still keep the constitution that guides and protects citizens.
Well, I think
No, that would not have been possible, Cassandra.
no,
Yeah.
you had
The revolution would not exist under the present constitution.
Mm-hmm.
There just was no place for a revolutionary government.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
The constitution itself says you have to have election every 4 years or 5 years.
Yeah, but and a lot more different things that happened there. So, in the absence of that, you had to have revolutionary laws. Because in all fairness, in a revolution, things operate differently than in a constitution. And I think that was one of the things that happened. The suspension of the constitution that was drafted not by Grenadians, and the one that was going to be would be done by Grenadians for Grenadians. So
Yeah.
that was the difference.
I think we have to appreciate that it was not possible for the revolution to function under the Constitution. Mm-hmm. The Constitution really speaks to the whole issue of Parliament and procedures and so on. And there was the whole issue of Parliament and all that was a different system of government. Yeah. So it is understandable why the Constitution was suspended. The rights and the wrongs of it, and so is something for another discussion. But in fact, it is a fact of what happened, and it was not possible for the revolution to be a reality because we have to consider that the revolution had removed from office what was considered as the quote-unquote democratically elected government. Yes. And that was 3 years after you had an election. So it was not possible for that to happen. Okay. So let's move on to what do we see as what could have been those strengths, those opportunities, what opportunities that came to fore as a consequence of the revolution? What opportunities were embraced? And in hindsight, were there any opportunities that could have been embraced that were missed at that point in time? Delbert, I'll start with you this time around.
So I think the number one opportunity laid out, or that I think people appreciated more than anything else, was the need to educate the society. And the revolution created a situation very early where it explained that to people, and people bought into it. So, for example, right, the last year of the Gary administration, 109 students were given, back then it was called scholarship, to go to secondary school. 109 students. In the first year of the revolution, in the first few months actually, because in July of 1979, we awarded 1,118 students qualify to go to school on the public dime. And very shortly after that, we made secondary school totally free. So the number one opportunity for young people and people of all walks in life and all ages was the opportunity to educate and re-educate and further educate yourself. Nothing that the revolution did after that was singularly more important. Victimization, which plagued Grenada before and plagued Grenada now, was significantly reduced. Significantly. I wouldn't say it was totally eliminated. There were nepotism during the revolution, as that's the case in most government. But it was significantly reduced. And there were people who were known people who had opposed the revolution, but were in important government jobs, who got to keep their jobs, and once they were doing it, they were not harassed. I want to go back on one thing that Cassandra said, and I know I'm getting a little off topic, so I'm going to be very short, about how does the revolution exist within the constitutional framework. And I know other people have spoken about it. But by and large, even if the Constitution was suspended, almost all the other structures stayed in place. So the criminal laws that were applicable before the revolution continued. When I was appointed to government, I had to go through and get my appointment through the Public Service Commission. Just like all these things remain in same. The only real thing that didn't function was the parliament, and of course the cabinet functioned a little differently. And then we had the emergency laws that were created sometimes in reaction to certain things that happened on the ground. But for me, the number one opportunity was the opportunity for people, I think for the first time, and maybe I'm being wrong by saying that, we understood how important education plays in the development of a country. And that opportunity, and also for local people to begin to see themselves and their children succeed in a way that they can really see their life.
You have muted yourself, Delbert. You have muted yourself.
Unmute Delbert.
Delbert, unmute. You have muted yourself. Unmute, Delbert.
Okay.
Okay.
Computer problem.
Yeah. Okay, you're back.
Yeah. Hello?
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I was talking about that whole question of how local farmers had the opportunity with the setting up of the marketing board. Now that they had an agency that was marketing stuff for them, we had taken one of the other things that the marketing board did was to identify some key products and to make sure that strong price controls were in place so that people weren't gouged in any area, which was something that had plagued the Grenadian landscape for quite a while. And the other thing where there were a lot of opportunities existed was in healthcare. We had begun to build a healthcare system. What was strange about that is that the first place I heard about the importance of primary health care was during the revolution. When I immigrated to the United States and in the 1992 election, I heard about it in the US and I had to laugh about it. I said, you know, when we were doing that, we were called all kind of names. Now it's popular, and look at it. Still, healthcare remains a major area of concern.
But we're not hearing you again, and we've lost it. Yeah.
Healthcare. Bro.
Yeah, I don't know what you heard or what you heard. I'm driving, obviously, so I'm probably going to somebody else when I get to a better area. We can catch up on topic.
Okay. Hudson George, if you unmute your mic, can you indicate what from your vantage point, from looking back at that period, what do you see to have been some of the
opportunities missed?
Opportunities in general, whether those that were embraced or those looking
that
back
missed.
in hindsight that were missed. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I will start with Delbert where you talk about healthcare. Yes, because after the revolution collapsed and I visit Grenada, people who didn't like the revolution told me they missed the free healthcare, and this is why the NNP used the Louisans to go to Cuba to bring it back. So that was an opportunity missed, and we get it back. And going back to Cassandra now, the young lady, very good lady, very advanced in thinking. She talk about constitution and so. I think that the revolution made a mistake again, where I told you the revolutionary leaders wasn't cultured. And I don't want to get into no big thing, as you tell me they'll go into history. But they were not a cultured people. For them, they're not cultured, especially the leader of the country. he didn't know black people culture. So they made a mistake there where he should have known to the biggest gathering I ever took place in Grenada was when Fidel Castro visited Grenada. Or perhaps was the biggest one. I was not there. But the biggest gathering I see in Grenada was 1980, March 13th, the first year of the revolution. The biggest gathering of Grenadian I, Hudson Judge, ever seen in my life. So what the revolution had to do after March 13th, 1980, they should have called a snap election, because if it's a revolution, they could have always change the constitution to suit you, and they will win an election and continue on the revolutionary process. But instead of they use that opportunity after March 13th, the biggest gathering I ever see. I remember we was trained to drill for Ortega and Michael Manley at Paul Zeput, because that is where we were based. A Guyanese soldier named Bage.
Hudson.
Okay. No, you're just getting into it.
No, you're giving a story.
No, I'm not giving a story. I'm getting into it.
Hudson, let's just focus. Any other opportunities that you can
Okay. So if they had called the election,
yeah, you said that already.
Yeah, they could consolidate. And I think the revolution lost the opportunity, as I going back to again to the grassroots people, instead of taking intellectuals from other Caribbean to advise them, they should have gone in the community, the same mistake Kit Mitchell and them making now, consultation with the people. We didn't need Ralph Gonzalez to be an advisor to us. We didn't need Diddy Coles Jules. We had them in Grenada. We didn't need Mulhaj in Grenada. We had these people in Grenada. We should have gone local with the revolution, and perhaps the Cubans, in spite of the good, what they wanted to do from Grenada, the involvement in certain part in the revolution screwed up.
Okay, are there any other opportunities that you can identify? If not, we move on.
Well, the last opportunities, I blame the people of Grenada for making Maurice Bishop a symbol. Okay. And we should learn from not loving politicians too much. That's our opportunity. That's our opportunity. It is.
Well, that was part of the culture of the political culture. So
yes, we got to get rid of that.
People were just doing what they know and what they are accustomed to.
And then you will lose your life stupid.
I see that Dennis Charles has joined us. Dennis Charles, you have joined us at the point where we are discussing what were the opportunities that existed or that came to the fore as a consequence of the revolution, or that were embraced, or looking back in hindsight, were there any opportunities that would have been missed during that period? Mr. Dennis Charles, welcome to the comfort zone for today.
Well, welcome everyone, my fellow.
Welcome.
Yes, sir.
I'm a little bit late. I thought everything was canceled, so I left and I went out. I just checked my phone. But anyhow, let me just hurry up to say that the 1979 revolution, as I explained before, was the greatest opportunity Grenada ever had, and probably will ever have, to develop. You have folks like Unison Whiteman, Maurice Bishop, Bernard Code, the Louison brothers, and all of that. Whether you like him or not, Ewart Lane and all the others. I mean, these guys were, very bright guys. If you want to say academically. Now we must differentiate academics from common sense. And that is what a lot of Grenadians to this day fail to do. They think once you have a degree or a PhD or a master's in whatever, you're smart. You don't smart. You read a book. You're certifying something. That doesn't mean you. If you look throughout world history, the greatest set of beasts I don't want to say God made on the planet. They had education. Look at Nigeria right now. They just massacre Nigerian in the street because these people trying to exercise their democratic right. And all those leaders have PhDs. So a degree from a university don't mean nothing when you don't have common sense and you can't relate to the people. So let me go toward what we were talking about. So yes, I supported the revolution and I'm proud. I did. But it fell apart soon because what happened? It was not a revolution to build Grenada. It was a revolution to consolidate power. I had the opportunity to listen to Evan Matthew Bola. You know him as Mucho. Just about everybody, but they don't know the other person behind the scenes. That is Mucho, you know? And he was on a show with Livingston Nelson, the brother of Gravel Nelson. And God, sorry, somebody is just, oh, Jesus. Don't tell me the phone got off.
We're hearing you.
We're hearing you. We're hearing you. Go ahead.
You're hearing me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Okay,
anyhow,
you're good. You're good.
Guy has a wealth of knowledge. He was on a show last night with Grenada Today, GBN something. With Godfrey,
Mr. Charles. All of that information is all right, but can you zero in on?
Okay, I'll get to the point.
Yes, please.
I'll get to the point
because we are on a time constraint. So let's kind of stick to the issue, please.
Yeah. But you see, I must give context. You cannot talk without context. It's just showing what on a dog back. You must put context in it. So anyhow.
What were the opportunities? That period existed. That period happened. 79 to 83. Were there any opportunities that came as a consequence of that? What were embraced and what may have been
I get in there. I hear you loud and clear. I'm getting there. The opportunity to connect with the grassroots that made the revolution possible. Not the leadership that made the revolution possible. The grassroots people, the fighters, way before March 13, from 1973 onwards, to connect with them back after the victory was secured on March 13th. They were dumped on the wayside, right? Okay, because so we gravitated to Cuba, right? We get an airport out of it and a shipment of arms. So no way Bishop was going to come back in Tivoli and meet with the people on the drag next to LL Ramdani's shop. Bernard Code refused to come up. He don't go into La Poetry and meet with the regular guys smoking marijuana. They used to smoke before. Bishop used to smoke weed with them before. And I wish you had listened to Livingston Nelson. Let these guys tell you how close they were. And what happened after that, they were left the cultural part of it.
Mr. Charles, what you presenting here is for another show.
All right, well,
and we do not have all the time.
All right, well, I'm done. I'm out.
If you can tell us about the opportunities that we have existed.
Oh my God, my phone falling. Listen, Pablo, yes, I am out.
Okay.
I'm out. Thank you very much. I'm out. I have my own show tomorrow. I'm going to do my show.
Okay.
I'm out.
Right. Okay.
You cannot restrict people speaking without giving context. You can't do that. I'm out.
Okay, bye.
I'm out.
Can we move on to Martin Lewis? Ken, are you there?
Ken? Yeah. Ken? I'm here. Yes, I'm here. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I'm hearing you. 79 to 83. What opportunities?
Yeah, I think
as a consequence, and what were embraced and what we may have missed.
I think the greatest opportunity that was missed is like Grenada got a flying start 79 to 83. And had they pulled back again, taken the strategic position of pulling back, doing an election, realizing how small we are given the international scope and the difficulty of having that pull back, do an election, stop arresting anyone for their ideas or for any one of these so-called plots, truth and truth. I think if we did that, that was a really big opportunity missed. That would have lifted your standing in the eyes, and many of the other programs could have been continued. The education and many other things. I think that's the biggest opportunity that was missed. I think another opportunity that was really missed was one of the big opportunities that we did take was the one to democratize and go to the people, to get the people's involvement beyond just 5 years of an election. I know there were some villages, because of the nature of the people involved in the revolution, that would not have been involved. I still believe it was too tongue-centered. But in a lot of ways, the revolution to SCB, with agricultural program, started to meet out in different areas. And I think that was a breath of fresh air from the put a vote every 5 years, that's a democracy. So I think that was a big opportunity. And had those things continued, the revolution probably could have still bring a lot of benefits to working people.
Okay, Sister Cassandra, as a student of history, what do you see to have been some of the opportunities that would have come to the fore as a consequence of the revolution, and what may have been some of the missed opportunities during that period?
I want to support Ken's comments about the delay in having elections was something that I think was an opportunity that those who worked then would have missed. Also, looking back, I think that a lot of the players who were involved in the revolution actually held the revolution like if it was theirs, and not giving credit to those who were on the ground, those who were part of it, the people. And I think that was a big mistake. Even now, looking back, you talk about history. Some of these players are still holding on to the revolution like if it is their revolution and not the people's revolution. I travel across the region, and I'm certain many of you are aware that a lot of the Caribbean leaders and Caribbean people look up, still do, to Grenada. Us having a revolution is something that is part of their history, coincidentally. And I think that era should be nurtured, recorded, and promoted as an effort, a part in Grenadian history when Grenadian people fought for freedom, and not just surround the context and the discussions around the revolution, around the key players. There were other people involved, and I think that aspect of it is missed even to this day. Also, I would have liked to see the revolution, post-revolutionary era, hold on to the agro-processing and some of those tremendous ideas that were successful then and build on it. I heard mention some of the players who have met. I mean, Liam and Bernard and Livingston, and even some of you who are on the panel who are brilliant minds who are part of that era. I would have loved to see, and I know some of you are doing it, taking your experience and knowledge that you gained from that era and making a contribution to Grenadian, national development. But I would like to see more of it done, regardless of all of the bureaucratic red tapes I know do exist. I want to see that. I want to see more of that done, especially for us and the generation after us who are interested in if I may, framing that part of our history and learning from you guys, that mentorship. So yeah.
Brother John, have you spoken on that as yet?
Not yet.
No? So, Brother John, if you can unmute your mic and share with us, what were some of those opportunities that came to the fore as a consequence of the revolution?
Well,
what were embraced and what were missed?
Okay. Well, I love talking about what embraced. I'm a forward-thinking person. So, first of all, the opportunity for women's rights, right? Wow. The women's equal work for equal pay, the maternity leave law, the farmers' union was a good thing for the farmers themselves, come themselves in a union to do that. cooperative development was a big thing in Grenada. Which I was part of a beneficiary of that after the revolution still. I happened to be part of that and become the president of the Grenada Union of Productive Cooperative. After the government had liquidated the cooperative department, myself and others formed the Grenada Union of Cooperative, United Cooperative. So that one, the cooperative union, the women's movement, big time, the youth movement, I see all those opportunities to propel and educate the people. There was when we talk about democracy, it was fully entrenched. And people talk about grassroots. Who was the grassroots? And I think they're just trying to go to that point there. And I want to say this because I think we have a misunderstanding about grassroots. The grassroots is not a section of just a few people who oppose revolution. You understand? The grassroots were the people, the student movement, the youth movement, the women's movement, the farmers movement. That was grassroots. There was consultation with people from time to time. It was a big opportunity. People didn't have an opportunity to question the parliamentary representative. There was town hall meetings where the bureaucrat would go to the community and be faced with questions from the people about certain projects that happened. I mean, this was grassroots connection with people. The budget was another opportunity Grenada had to study the budget. It was presented to them to study it, before presenting it in a big way. So when we're talking about grassroots connection, the Grenada had that entrenched. So the opportunity was there. People was involved. The few disgruntled and disruptive minorities was involved in destabilizing the process. So again, we have to understand the context when we talk about grassroots. What is grassroots? Who are the grassroots? A few people who, I don't want to probably allow me just to drop this one in here. When we talk about the people who helped make the revolution, the essence of the revolution, let me remind those who making this statement that the very people who was considered counter-revolutionaries and was imprisoned, many of them was disbanded before the 1979 revolution as terrorist organization. Okay? So it does not something new. There was always been those folks who was there as a disruptive minority. Alright? So let me say that. So the opportunity of missed is that cultivating a new mindset in those who was opposed. So sit down with them and say, look, we want to build this thing together. Alright? And we want to work with you. But we want to have an honest and open and frank conversation. Right? The same thing happened to the counter-revolutionaries. Then what they call it happened in October 1983. So the missed opportunity of connecting with people at that level there. Not the grassroots. There was always grassroots communication. The disruptive minority.
John.
Hold on. Pablo going to give you a time to speak.
Yeah.
The disruptive minorities, right, who was focusing and disrupting the opportunities that given to Grenadian people. You understand? It was planned the missed opportunities by those people to become leaders. They've proved to themselves that what they was doing was wrong, trying to kill the leadership of the country. That was a missed opportunity by the so-called counter-revolutionaries. So there's missed opportunities on both sides. If they had continued to go on the ground as a political party or whatever underground that the NGM did, perhaps they would have been able to gain some popularity. The biggest mistake and missed opportunity that they had was planting a bomb. And what they did, even the revolution at that time, was kind of having a lack of support. There was, and there's evidence to prove that. Even KB said that. They realized that there was a problem, and the only thing they could do was to kill the leadership. And they missed that opportunity of connecting with the people, and they blew it.
Well, John.
Yes.
Can I say something?
Judge, yes.
Okay. I'm going to cut it short.
Yeah,
what I think John missing, you talk about who are the grassroots. Okay. The Grenada Revolution was not created by one group of people. Whether before the revolution happened, those groups had little conflicts. Remember, it was a collective effort. Because on March 13 morning, after the guys overthrow the Gary barracks in town and they take St. Paul's police station, and they take Grenada, the police station going on to Blue. Remember, the fort wasn't captured, and the other 5 parishes on the mainland and Carriacou wasn't taken over. So the groups that end up counter-revolutionary in the revolution, if they didn't take over that other part of it, we would not have a revolution. So we can't say that. What the mistake in the revolution is that lack of consultation with the other groups. And due to the lack of consultation with the other groups of people in the revolution, and you alienate them, you create counter-revolutionaries, if ever you had. And then you bring in a lot of foreign people into Grenada as advisors. So the revolution lost its roots. And then now, the revolution lost its roots. And then, if you look at the end of the revolution, what happened on October 19th? October 19th exposed the mistake of the revolution, because the people who fought the revolution came out in mass numbers, confused.
Okay.
And the revolution committed suicide.
The next section that we're getting into is going to provide the opportunity to elaborate a little bit more on that. Okay. So we dealt with opportunities.
Pablo.
Hello. We dealt with opportunities. I want us now, remember the next section that we're getting into, and because in the interest of time, remember we do not have all the time in the world. Okay, so I want in the next 20 minutes that everyone here is going to have an opportunity to speak on what were the threats to the revolution, and that is going to give you time to touch on some of the things that were just mentioned. What were the threats to the revolution, real or imagined, right? What were the threats to the revolution during that period? And in the context of the conflict that ensued, what are some of the things that could have been done? Could the process have been saved? And how could the process have been saved? All right, so we're dealing with these two issues, and I want to go through the four of you within the next 20 minutes. So each person has 5 minutes to speak, starting with you, Delbert. Threats and, yeah.
So the some of the, obviously imperialism was the #1 threat, and that is no longer debatable, because in the end they invaded and overthrew the government. So that was a real threat. But there were people, like John suggested, who had fallen out of favor with the process for one reason or the other, and felt that because it appeared to them that the revolution had been won so easily. And when I'm saying won, I'm talking about the actual overthrow of the existing government. They felt, and because they had some inside information into some of the things that had happened leading up to March 13th, they felt empowered, and they were in a position that they could then turn around and overthrow the government. So in many ways, we sort of overreacted to that, because the reality is that they were never strong enough to physically or violently overthrow the revolution. What they would have been able to do was to, along the way, create disturbances and to sort of use violence and other such activities to destabilize the process. And we have the pleasure right now of looking at this, 40 years back. Most of us are much more educated, much more learned, have developed a lot more experience, worldly experience, and are better able to look at problems and come up with solutions. We did not have that opportunity. We were in the middle of it. We were right in the picture frame, and in so doing, we did not have the opportunity to look at the process from the outside. So we saw everything, some were real, some were not, as perceived threats. And the disposal to crush them. And that turned out to be, in retrospect, a mistake, because the reality is that we had the best ideas. And if we had sought to fight on that battlefield, I think we would have always won.
Okay. So that's for threats. In the midst of the conflict that ensued, therefore, what do you think could have been done in order to save the process? Because it appears to some that the internal machination of the party and the issues between them took precedence over the development agenda. So the development agenda ultimately suffered as a consequence of the approach that was taken. What do you think could have been done differently that could have caused the development agenda to continue?
That's for me?
Yeah, that's for you. We're dealing with both of these things simultaneously.
Yes, so I agree with you to a certain extent, but that came up a little later, because I think that one of the things that affected the development agenda was the lack of we had finite resources, and then the lack of human resources, both the technical and other skills to drive an economy. So the revolution had goals and aims that, in other words, there's this common saying that, you shouldn't write a check that, you know what can't cash. We were writing checks that we couldn't cash. We were speaking about large scale, huge development that we did not have the technical and human resources to carry out. So so what happened is that the work began to suffer, and then people started pointing fingers, as many people think it was the other way around. It wasn't. It wasn't that people put put their own personal position or the core ideas of the revolution ahead of the development of the people. It was that people felt that the revolution was sort of not succeeding and when I say people, I'm talking about the top leadership of the party, felt that we were not succeeding at the rate that we wanted to. Things had slowed down, and therefore that's all the whole question of joint leadership and all these things came up, because we wanted to redefine who would be responsible for very particular areas of work, so as to make sure that work get done, and that if it didn't get done, that somebody will be held responsible for it. And that created the problem. That created the problem. So for me, I saw that as a major problem. In terms of whether the process could be solved, I believe it could have been. And only this week on another group that I'm part of, a think tank, I posted something, because whenever October come about, we think about it, and said that had this central committee, and I want to be clear about that, sort of brought in the second tier and the third tier group of leaders within the revolution, would we have been able to put peace among the top leaders? I believe we would have, because at my level, I know there were some comrades who we kind of were on different sides. We were on different sides, but we were still talking, and at every level we were trying to say, how can we save this? How can we work this out? What's going on? These people are too intimately involved, and where it became, almost self-preservation took over, and they were not looking at the bigger picture. And while folks like me who were continued to work were begging with them and pleading, guys, we can work this out. The revolution is bigger than all of us, and somehow the message was not getting through. I asked the question because, and I think I spoke to John about that, I believe that had HA not abandoned his position within the party and within the army, that he had an opportunity up until the very, very, very last moment to pull the sides back together. But for whatever reason, he was not able to do it, and the upper leadership didn't trust us enough at the second and third tier leadership position to intervene and try to talk them back from the ledge, so to speak.
Okay. Hudson George, your turn. 5 minutes. What was some of the threats that the revolution faced, real or imagined? On top of that, could the process had been saved? 5 minutes.
Okay. The revolution claimed that they had outside threats. And if you have a revolution, you must have outside threats. So I'm not denying the revolution was free from outside threats because they were preaching socialism. Socialism versus capitalism. So there is obvious there was outside threat, right? But the revolutionary became paranoid and counter-revolutionary become a boogeyman for them. So if you don't agree, you are counter-revolutionary. You are boogeyman. So they cut counter-revolutionaries by saying people is counter-revolutionary. So because they're paranoid. Also, the revolution moved too fast in purging other groups. For example, they purged the Rasta movement too quick. Most Rastas want weed. And they want to hear Bob Marley. They're just studying to overthrow you. So I don't know if it's outside influence tell them to purge the Rastas. And maybe that's one of the big mistakes they make. They purge the Rastas too quick. And lastly, based on Belbot's statement, it is a history of revolutionaries, socialist revolutionaries, making this mistake. Go back to Trotsky and Lenin. Both Trotsky and Lenin were Marxists. And Stalin killed Trotsky. Also, in China, Deng Xiaoping and Mao Zedong were both communists, but they had little differences. But Mao didn't kill Deng and he didn't jail him. He sent him in the countryside. So you got to look at two people don't necessarily be the same. And I think the Grenada Revolution, they start purging and they become paranoid until they purge their own self on October 19th. And we must admit that some mistake make. And a lot of people you think were counter-revolutionary was socialist just as you was socialist. They might tell you something different, but they had the idea. And that's where the mistake make. I done.
The thing of, you missed one thing. The process. Could the process have been saved?
Yes.
Or what could have been done to save the process?
Here they could have saved the process.
2 minutes.
All right, 2 minutes. All those guys had to do was to put down that guns. Put down the guns before that build up to this thing happened. And they didn't have to perhaps kill Maurice Bishop or what. They could have used the military in a different way. And if Maurice Bishop was the guy that the people have listened to a lot, and perhaps he could have antagonized the revolution if you let him loose, they could have Maurice Bishop in tongue and the military in a sort of way for a long time and think cool out and nothing in it. But they just move with a quick head. The quick head thing was not good. But I won't say that those guys, like if you ask some bishop people, they go tell you, oh, the other group was CIA. Each group calling one another CIA. But none of them maybe were not CIA. But the mistrust came between the two groups. And perhaps foreign influence from same socialist countries. I don't know.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Ken Martin Lewis, it's your turn. What was some of the threats, real or imagined, and could the process have been saved and how?
I want to start with the process being saved if I could. Yes, the process could have been saved. And I agree with Hudson. I mean, it's funny. I agree with Hudson 100%. My old friend Hudson. Let me tell you this. The revolution could have been saved. And it could have been saved because people were much closer than they thought. For instance, when I could say his name, when James Harry was being called a counter-revolutionary, I remember my father saying that they must be crazy because James Harry is the first socialist he knew. You understand? So as Hudson said, people were not that far apart.
No,
it was basically
no, no.
this thing of, it's basically this thing of people just having all the personal issues and things many times that don't really matter. I mean, people have said me today, Morris wasn't really a socialist and Bernard was. I mean, nothing could be further from the truth. You understand? They were both socialists. It's just people had differences, and the same as Buck and all other people. There was just a lack of communication. So I think that was one. And that was the way revolution could have easily save itself. We as Grenadians need to negotiate more. We need to talk things out more. Still today, 40 years later, I see us making those mistakes. And then I want to look at the threats. Usually when you look at threats is always considered external in a SWOT analysis. In the case of Grenada, as much as imperialism was a real threat, the main threat I consider was an ability for us to forego the political struggle for the military struggle. Let me give a simple example. One of the maneuvers, let me go to another point first. Hudson, you say that in 1980 was the biggest crowd you saw in March.
Biggest crowd I ever seen in Grenada.
Right. So the biggest crowd, support of the revolution. But yet by June, when the bomb blast was placed, people were saying that the revolution wasn't as popular. How could it lose popularity in 2 months? You understand? That's one thing. Yeah. The second point I want to make is this. Let me show you how people lose their ability because they have guns. We had a maneuver, probably 82, and everybody in the militia in the Northeast had them committed. But was Bolio Harvest Day. And they had a very big crowd party. 1 second.
You mute? We can. You mute, Ken?
Unmute yourself. No, Ken.
Unmute yourself.
Sorry.
Yeah.
So I was saying, we had, in probably 82, we had a maneuver. And so everybody committed that we will get our 200 men to go on the maneuver. At 2 a.m. in the morning, even if it was Bolio Harvest Day, one of the biggest harvests in the country, John, we were seeing about 20 men. So basically, me and Piano look at each other and we say, okay, we know what they're there, as we say in Grenada. And we went up to the harvest, took the mic. No, don't ask me 40 years later how I could have been so stupid, eh? Please don't ask me that. I went up and took the mic, and I told all who were in the militia, of course, AK on my back, all who in the militia find themselves as they commit to come to the maneuver. Well, within an hour we had probably another 150 men. But some even came in their chunky heel. You wouldn't know what a chunky heel is, Cassandra, but you can't really walk all of them good in it. But so this ability of us to forego the political, in other words, go and convince people to make sure they come. You just took the military approach. And that was coming more and more common in the revolution. It was a real threat, and you cannot build anything like that. The Americans have found that out. Everybody has found that out. If if Proteus didn't find a political solution in Iraq, nothing was happening. You can't do some things militarily. And the revolution was not learning that until its demise.
Yeah.
Okay. Sister Cassandra, you didn't live through that period, but from your historical historical perspective, from your historical research, did you find that that process that was called, that period that was called the revolution, the process, that was initiated, did you find that there was any evidence of a threat to that period, to the government of the day, or as such, and real or imagined? And looking back at it, do you think that there was any way that any measures that could have been taken to save that process?
Looking back, I think the ambitions of the revolution was well intent. I said it earlier. I think the policies are well defined, but institutional and human capabilities were inadequate to effectively implement some of these policies. Then there were a lot of conspiracies going around, whether it was as relates to imperialism, as relates to our leaders' relationship with communist states, and other things. But Ken is right. When you're talking about looking, you have to look at external factors. During the uprising of the revolution, you had right next door in Trinidad the Black Power uprising. Other parts of the world, you had civil rights movement and other liberation struggles that obviously would have affected what was happening us here in Grenada. That's one. That's a few things that has to be taken into consideration. Then you're looking at the recession of the 1980s. Where was Grenada's economic standing? There are statements that Grenada would not have gotten anywhere without some sort of relationship with Cuba. And then how would that relationship have affected the US? I mean, with Reagan looking on and paying attention to what's happening here. So I know I haven't lived through it, but I would have liked to go in depth with you guys as to how all of those issues would have affected what was happening here. Because I didn't live through the era. You just hear conspiracies and people's opinion, and even my own. I've developed my own opinion as to how all of those external factors would have affected the Grenadian Revolution in terms of the Black Power uprising in Trinidad, civil rights movement, and other liberation struggles across the world. You're looking at the economy and the preceding recession of the 1980s, how that would have affected Grenada and some of the policies that the revolution would have had in place. I have more questions than opinions, because I would need to hear from those who have lived through that era to understand how all of those conspiracies and all of the factors, external factors, would have affected their policies here in Grenada, and how the leaders, those involved, would have looked at those external factors, the Black Power uprising in Trinidad, the civil rights movement, the recession of that era, and how all of those factors would have tied in to the economy, the Grenadian economy. I think the objectives and they were well intent, but they had external factors affecting it, real or perceived. It'll be interesting to have another discussion on that and look at it from all of those perspectives, because these are factors that actually existed. So how would all of these things happening outside would have affected those decisions?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, Brother John.
Yes, sir.
Time for your voice
All right.
on that issue as to threats, real or imagined, and could the process have been saved, and how?
Well, threat I imagine. I think there was always a threat, and there was always a fear of a threat from Grenada. The imaginary threat came from the other side, from the imperialists. I mean, in context of the international airport, when Ronnie made a statement that the Grenada airport will be a jump-off point to launch attack on America, this was fear-mongering on the American citizens, the propaganda. So they had an imaginary thought that the Grenada Revolution would attack America. I mean, can you imagine that? That was sold. So that was an imaginary threat on the other side. The threat on our side was real from our end. Yes, there was activities surrounding the overthrow of the government. We can't forget. The threat was real. All right. because we see what happened, and even KB make it plain that they planted the bomb in the past. So that was a real threat. It was executed. Could the process would have been saved? Yes. And let me just take 2 minutes here because I have come from a different vantage point. I want you guys to listen carefully because question of could it have been solved? Saved? Yes. And I'm saying it from where I was standing, where I was sitting, the position I held there as a personal security officer to both Maurice, Bernard, Uni, and George at any given time, right? We had a serious problem. And people I want to listen to that really clearly. The aggression didn't come from the other side, what you call the Bernard Code side. It didn't come from there. When the situation, and I say it could have been saved, if the aggression didn't come from the side which was not willing to negotiate, wasn't willing to talk again. I remember clearly, Fitzroy came up to the yard to visit Maurice. And he said, when he was denied, I remember I and one soldier tell him, they chose to tell him that he can't go in. So he was not able to go in to see Maurice. All right? He said, okay, you don't want me to see Maurice? We arm in the masses tomorrow and blood go run like water. We are in the process. Secondly, Vincent Noel came up in the yard, right? The yard between Maurice and Bernard, and he was stopped right there, and he was directed, and he was questioned. And they were going to send me with him to recover, to check his house or to see what ammunition he had, based on what feature I said. But I didn't go. They sent another soldier to find. They found that he had more guns in the house than ever, right? Fast forward, right? On October 19th, the fort was taken over, right? Unison Whiteman. As a matter of fact, let me back up. Dorset Peters called Region 1. That's over and read that Fort Frederick. He called and he spoke to the lady in the booth. I think her name was Alison. And she came and said, Callis, there's a phone call for one of you guys. So I took the phone call from Dorset Peters. He said, Callis, them men are opening the armory, they're taking the weapons, they're planning to distribute to the masses. All right? Just as he finished saying that, Unison Whiteman walked in. Future been walking behind him. The voices, I know the voices. Right? The 3 men walked into that room and they called him an effing traitor. And a gunshot went off. And assuming that they shot him, he did not come back on the phone. And Uni asked who it was. I said it was Comrade Callis. He said, Comrade Callis, I'm doing you a favor. On all of you all a favor, I want you guys to surrender to the nearest police station or face your guys' death. I said, excuse me? He said, I'm doing you a favor. No more negotiation, no more compromise. This is what he said to me. I was 17 years old. Right? I went and tell my supervisor, those Roger James at the time, and he went and get Headache, and Headache came and answered the thing. And I told him the same thing. No more negotiation. So the thing could have been solved, they were willing, because the other side was willing to sit down and talk still. They was not willing to talk anymore. And that's the truth. They was not willing to talk anymore. And that, it could have been said if they were willing to sit down and talk. They refused to continue dialogue. And that's where the situation went off fire. So it could have been said, yes, if the hotheads was able to sit down and say, look, let's talk, brother. We have this end here, let's sit down and talk about it. They didn't want to talk anymore. They refused to talk. So yes, it could have been saved. Yes, it could have been saved. And that's my thing. Pablo, back to you. Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
I hear you. The process could have been saved.
It could have been saved.
Now, after all of this, the revolution has fallen. Since then, we have seen as Cassandra, who did not live through that period, but is a student of history, based on her studies coming from school, through listening to all of the conversation that has been ongoing. She has concluded that there were things that happened during the revolution that were much better for a development process, a development agenda for Grenada than what presently exists. With that being the case, or looking at it from that perspective, because Let me just, before I go ahead. Now, certain things were just said by John Callis. Um, all of what's been said, he put it forward as um, how the process could have been saved, right? As saying that this was the means that this is what could have been undertaken. We had different people saying different things as to what could have, could have saved the process. But the process was not saved. I guess I expect that what has been put forward here, there could be a whole lot more conversation about it. But we have to appreciate that what we're doing here, we're working within a particular time frame, and we do not have all the time in the world. Maybe we can come back, we can return to this at some other time and discuss some of the issues that have been raised in more detail if people are so inclined. But I want to go through all of what I set out to do in my original agenda. So now I want to look at what are some of those lessons that can serve for a development agenda going forward. And I want to start with the lady, just as I did in the very beginning, seeing that she's a student of history and she has already indicated that there were things that existed during that period that had us in a better position than the one that we are in right now. So, Ms. Mitchell, if you will take the lead in this last, component of our conversation this evening. Ms. Mitchell.
I think for me, looking back at that era in our history, one of the lessons that I have learned as a young leader is to bridle my exuberance and to understand that while youthfulness is needed, there needs to be a merger of youthfulness and experience when it comes to the development of our country. That for me is one of the biggest lesson I've learned as a young person in leadership positions. As someone who's interested in agriculture, one of the things that I hope that we can adopt and build upon is the agro-processing, some of the policies and programs that were in place back then. I would love to see our leaders, our policymakers look back at that era and adopt some of the policies that existed then, and of course make it current to what's happening in Guinea now. I would love to see that because agriculture, and I think the pandemic has taught many of us that is really the backbone of our economy. And while yes, we are dependent on tourism, you have to merge those two sectors. Food security is really, really critical, and it will be even more so as we move forward. And you look at the predictions from the World Health Organization and the FAO and other organizations that's focused on food security, even organizations who weren't focused on food security, interesting enough, are placing a large emphasis on trying to solicit funding for developing the agricultural sector and building food security in countries affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. So that is what I would love to see. And that is something I keep pushing in my corner every time I get to speak to our policymakers or to agencies who are asking for feedback and input on how, as a young female, I see agriculture developing in a developing country. So that's something that I hope that we can learn from the revolutionary era.
Thank you. I am hoping that one of the things I hope that we can learn from you, Sister Cassandra, is how we can be precise in our presentations and zero in on the issues and the point that we need to make, and not go into all of into a lot of periphery, those the surrounding songs and issues in order to make the point. I hope that we can learn from you as to how we make a point, be precise, be straight to the point, and say what we need to say without having to bring in all sorts of unnecessary and irrelevant issues. I mean, some of which are better suited for another occasion or for another kind of discussion. Hudson George, your turn to share on what do you see as some of the lessons from the revolution that can serve in the creation of a development agenda going forward. Unmute your mic, please. Unmute your mic, please, Hudson. Hudson, your mic.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Well, basically, I think what we should learn to move forward is that we need to sit down, discuss, put things together, the pros and the cons. For example, I would like to see that professor lady from who lectured in Barbados, Wendy La Grenade, take a different approach to the revolution, not because she's an intellectual. She should take a position and say we must write the history of the revolution from that same artificial tribal perspective. Because I was listening to her. It doesn't matter how intelligent people are, but you need collective ideas to deal with this revolutionary process that become historical for us. But I think the revolution the mistakes and the good could bring us forward. And I would like to see Bonnet could come back to Grenada and contribute, but not maybe politically, but contribute because that is where he's from. He is a good asset to the state in spite of what we might think about him. I'm not saying in government, but I would like to see him come back to Grenada and give back something before he died. That's all I have to say.
Okay. If we can move on now to Brother John Callis.
Wow. All right. Thank you very much, Pablo, again. What I would like to see, I think too hastily we try to erase the gains and benefits of a previous government to bring in their own. And I think for the development of Grenada, you have to marry our full field. You know, whatever was conceptualized from the past must continue to give birth to things that are conceptualized and nurture those that already been in the process. And that, if we don't do that, that will bring us back to square one. And we see it happening now. You get rid of the Bataranti, you get rid of the agro-industrial plant, you get rid of the Sandino plant, you get rid of the Manhattan farm. Those things, all the projects was being set up to economically enrich Grenada in one way or the other has been dismantled. So to foster a better economic growth for Grenada, you must continue to maintain that what was positive. And I think the lack of that is what they try to do is to erase the memory of the good so people will not refer to it. You know, and what we see people still referring to because they know what they had, and what they have now it doesn't make any sense. It's not giving them the credence that they need, the economic development, a boost that they need to go forward. So yes, I think those things should have been continued for the future development of Grenada. The participation of people who was doing what was right, keep them in and let them continue. The question of being able to manage the way it was done, a central planning unit would have been a very good thing to have had to continue the process. That would have been, again, forward thinking. But for the further development of Grenada, that should have been done. And keep this in mind. Have what you call people's participation at the community, so-called grassroots level. That will be better managed now than before. People want it to have a voice in actually running up their affairs. So I think that would have been good for the overall development of Grenada. Get the farmers back, get the youths back, get the women's organization back in a big way. You know, help mobilize people and bring them back together and have a unity among the people. This tearing apart doesn't help. So bring that together, the unity that was there with all sections of the community, and would have been a good thing to have in place right now. We divide too much around party lines, which party is which party, and this, that is the destruction. But if you bring people back together as one unit, then you will be able to have a better, a stronger, and a more forward-thinking government. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brother John. Brother Martin, Brother Ken Martin Lewis.
Yes.
Your turn.
When somebody said Ken Martin Lewis, that means they were in school with me, eh?
Yes, well, we were in school. You were one form ahead of me, but we were in school.
You know your name from the register. I believe that one of the really great things we can learn from the revolution, and I disagree with Hudson on that, when Hudson said they had too much people from outside coming in. I think that this is a global world, and in some cases we take advantage of globalism, some places we don't. And one of the things that I don't see Grenada taking advantage of is we tend to be very narrow and national. I don't think to develop unless they have more people coming in from different countries, getting different perspectives. That's the way. It's no accident that Google, Microsoft, Facebook, take it. All of these people, all of these major companies in the world have benefited from immigrants coming in and doing stuff. So I think Grenada has to look further, and they could learn from the revolution how intelligent that we would develop. And again, we want to go back to what John said. I think what I said too earlier on, the system thing. I think we have to understand better the way the world works. I mean, Cassandra, I have seen some of the young leaders, for instance, in some of their postings and prominent people on Facebook. I know Delbert has referred to that. And I shudder to think with some of these ideas that at this age, they need to understand more the way the world works. Because I think that's something you don't see in books. That's something they hide from us a lot. So it's not really there. Should I say it's not really unexpected? But if young people are to take the reins of Grenada soon, because my generation is going out, the youth have to become far more aware than the youth of the revolution. Because the youth of the revolution, at least they had an excuse. They were 22 and 23. So that was really young. Many of the youth in Grenada are in their 30s and beyond. So we have to get a better understanding, better experience of the world. Because when the Keith Mitchells and the Franca Bernardines and these people are gone from national life, is young people. And on behalf of the people of Grenada, you guys have to understand the way this world works, not in a theoretical way, but in a practical way, because that's what's going to make a real difference for our people. Thanks.
Thank you, Brother Ken. Mr. Baptiste, it is your turn now and it seems like you're the man wrapping up on that issue, the issue of what are some of the lessons that can be learned from that period in terms of the construct of the development agenda going forward.
So when you look at the key pillars of the revolution, education, jobs, healthcare, building infrastructure, and sort of the beginning to plan an economy jointly with the state and the private sector and the ordinary working class, the farmers, the small landowners. We can almost adopt this model. If you can't build a country, you can't develop a country if you don't educate its people. So we have to go back and make a greater investment, or make the best investment that we possibly can in the education of our young people. And education now has changed, you know. Now it's, whether or not it's so much about education, or whether it's more about having the correct information at the point in time to act on it. But certainly we got to make an investment in our people. And not just on the academic side, but on the skills side, where we seek to build and improve on the skills of our young people across the spectrum. We must develop better healthcare vehicles to deliver healthcare to our people. And the concept of primary healthcare, which was made popular, 30, 40 years ago, is relevant today, because when you look at what has happened with healthcare in Grenada, even though now we have we certainly have more doctors, more learned, more skilled, but more and more people are suffering from chronic illnesses. The question of agriculture, the emphasis that was placed on agriculture, the importance, and the actual marriage back then in 1979 of agriculture and tourism. Right now, people are beginning talking about that now like it's a new concept. Actually, the first Minister of Agriculture and Tourism following the revolution, those two ministries were combined, which laid out a sort of bold new agenda of what we wanted to do with agriculture, tying it into tourism, because it was the research, the data at that point in time said, I think that like almost 79 cents out of every tourist dollar spent in Grenada was immediately going back outside. So there was no real benefit from tourism. So the idea of marrying our agriculture to our tourism, to our culture, and to spreading the tourism throughout the island to the out parishes and the out villages where people who normally don't benefit from it can benefit would help greatly. Some of the institutions that were created by the revolution, like the marketing board, like the agro-processing plant, which sort of work jointly and in combination with each other to help farmers identify what they plant, when they plant it, where there is market for it, and how these two agencies or two bodies were going to work together to improve the livelihood of farmers. Marketing board has moved away, have walked away from its original function. Right now, it's a corner store. It's not doing anything to enhance the lives of the farmers or so forth. Eugenia Charles was smart enough. She took the agro-processing plant out of True Blue and brought it to Dominica as her gift for overthrowing the revolution. The NIS, which survived, has survived and must expand and bring in more services. And the only way you can do that is if that you have people who again understand how best they can use what we have to expand its reach, to make it more wealthy, and in a way that it can bring more services and benefits back to the people. NIS has not lived up to the expectation or to its dream, what was the manner in which it was conceived. The question that the point Cassandra made earlier on about food security, that we didn't call it food security in 1979, but in essence, that's what it was. We were beginning to encourage people to seriously eat what they grow and for us to grow more and more of what we ate, you know. All these things that were relevant then are now critical to our development. So my advice is for us to take a second look at those programs. Those programs were not socialist. Those programs were about benefiting and empowering people. Despite all the criticism about socialism, the Grenadian economy during the revolution remained a largely private economy. And the private sector did very, very, very well during that period. I want to agree with my friend Hudson that I think honestly, and I've expressed that to John and other people, that I think Bernard should be given the opportunity to come and contribute back to Grenada. It doesn't have to be in a political nature. He's well known as a brilliant economist and thinker, and I'm sure that the country can use him now. And I want to push back a little, Ken did, but I want to push back just a little more on that thing about one of the major benefits of the revolution was our regional friends and partners coming to assist. The revolution would never have been able to succeed and deliver some of the benefits had we not brought in people from the outside. So some of the very people that you mentioned, Hudson, the Cosjus in education, the Olbuske in information, the Denzel Wilkes in finance marketing board, the other people in the media houses, Chris Sauls in the teachers training college. These gave us, we did not have the talent, we did not have the expertise, we did not have the human capital to do some of the things. So that remains one of the shining examples and successes of the revolution. And especially if you look at it in today's context, there is no island in the Caribbean, no country in the Caribbean, including Trinidad and Jamaica and those others that have recently found major deposits of fossil fuel, that are going to be able to build and develop the economy independent of the other islands surrounding them. So the idea towards regional unity is important, and it starts at that level, because if you have people at the ordinary level working across different countries, working across different borders, it helps us bring our people better and better, closer and closer.
Delbert, you're mute again.
That's good.
Delbert, you are muted. Yeah, you're back.
Yes. No, I was saying that experience of having international workers coming in and helping us and assisting us remains one of the shining example of regional cooperation and us looking at ourselves in the Caribbean as one people. We can't say that we are one people, or we can't say that we should develop together if we can't have those kind of people, if we can't have people, not only goods and services, but actual people moving across different boundaries to work and help islands and countries develop and bring expertise that in. And it's happening internationally now. The point Ken made, when you look at companies like Google and Facebook and those most of the engineers come from all different parts of the world. So that idea of collaborating with our regional brothers and sisters, I saw as one of the shining examples. And I had the opportunity to work with some of these people, and I know it enhanced my capability to do my job better in what I was doing.
Okay, so we have run out of time. And it is at this point in time I make some brief closing remarks, and we bring an end to the comfort zone for today. It's unfortunate that Murphy continued to plague us this weekend, and we had challenges with, I had challenges getting my internet connection going. I was showing that I'm connected to the wireless, but there was no internet connection and so on. So the program started half an hour later than it was supposed to. But we did have a conversation, the conversation that, I wanted to have. Let me first say, I want to apologize to Mr. Charles for, not being able to continue with him as I hoped would have been the case. But we seem to have been on different pages. I know that Mr. Charles, he has been on a variety of shows over the past week and so. And the focus has been looking at the history, looking at who did what, looking at who's to blame for what, looking at, making comparative analysis between the Gary period and the Revolution period. This program was not set out to do that. We have been doing that for the past 37 years. So I set out to try to do something differently today, to focus on that period itself. One, March 13th, 1979 happened. If that did not happen, I should say, we would not be having a conversation of any kind about a Grenada Revolution.
Absolutely.
Because prior to that, there was never any conversation about a Grenada Revolution. It was the event on the morning of March 13th and the ensuing period up to October 1983 that left us with what we call the Grenada Revolution. Yes. So my intent from the very beginning was to speak about, to look at that period, and to look at what were the strengths of that period, what were the weaknesses, what were the opportunities, what were the strengths, given the fact that this thing fell apart as a consequence of conflict. Not delve into the nature of the conflict, but what are the lessons from that conflict, and what could have been done differently that could have caused that conflict or not caused that conflict situation to put an end to the development process that had been started. That was the essence of the conversation. Now, if we had gone off into so many of the other peripheral issues, then we wouldn't have been able to get through what my agenda was. Remember, I put this program together and I wanted to accomplish something specific. I wanted to have a conversation about the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. I didn't set out to do a historic overview. So if Mr. Charles didn't understand that and felt that, this was not suitable to what he wanted to say, I am sorry, okay? And he felt he needed to leave, okay. But as I said, I hope that we learn from Cassandra. We learn from, they said, go to the wise and prudent, no. Go to the they say the youth shall lead us all. And if we can allow the youth to lead us on that, they say, what was hidden from the wise and prudent revealed to the babe and suckling. That's the quotation I'm looking for. And we saw Cassandra here this afternoon. When the question was asked, she zeroed in on it and spoke to it, okay? And I think that is a lesson that we can learn going forward as to how we treat with certain things when we set out to have a particular kind of conversation. I didn't expect it to be an easy program. I knew there were going to be difficulties. I knew it's a difficult time for people who have been through that process, who have lived through that process, who are integrally involved in that process in one way or another, whether you were part of the administration or whether you were someone who was a detainee under that administration. As I said earlier on, when you're in the frame, you can't see the picture. I was not in the frame. So I am looking at this thing from a different vantage point to those who were in the fray. I had some, I played, you know, the song Natty Dread in a PRA, but time didn't allow to play some of the other ones that I wanted to, the one by Flying Turkey, Innocent Blood, the Plain Truth by Scorpion, then we have Black Wizard, O Grenada, and there's a song that I chose from the Massacre Kids Africana that I found was kind of, you know, relevant to our time. Is something called Champion. You know, something called Better Tomorrow. The group's name is Champion. The Massacre Kids Africana, if you don't know, is African kids who are, you know, they basically orphans for one reason or another, whether the parents died from AIDS or because of all of the civil conflict and so that's taking place and so on. You know, I intended to include also some of the comments from the chat room, but I don't know, for some reason, when I tried to scroll in the chat room, there's something that coming up and just blocking me. I couldn't scroll through to see the different comments that were being made, you know, so I don't know what was the situation there, but that wasn't possible. And, but certain things came out of here that indicate that, you know, maybe we need to have another program. Something I wanted to highlight here, the whole issue of our parliamentary democracy and how it allows our parliamentarian to lie with impunity, really, to say things that they could be charged for libel and slander and so if they say it outside of parliament, but inside of parliament they could get away with it, you know. So what kind of impact does that have on the mindset of the parliamentarian and on the mindset of us as citizens? You know, and I think that is a conversation that we need to have. And the diaspora contribution. How can the diaspora contribution be more significant, be made more significant? We know that remittances play a significant role and so, you know, from the diaspora standpoint. But what more can the diaspora do? How can the diaspora be engaged in order to facilitate greater trade, greater selling of our products, getting into certain niche markets and that kind of thing? I'm hoping that somewhere down the road that we can have a conversation about that. So at this point in time, we bring a close to the program for this week. I want to say thank you to all of those who who agreed to be on the panel here today. Thank you to all of those who joined us, who viewed and who made comments, although I couldn't say anything to it. But thank you very much. And thank you, John Callis, for allowing me the opportunity to do that as always.